Okay, well, I think we shall start the seminar now. Thank you to all those who are joining us. I'm here to chair today's session, and I'll just briefly introduce who's on the panel, but to give you a little bit of a context as to why we organise this event. This is a 90 days on, so maybe a few days in or out, but basically the idea of thinking of the follow-up from COP and what we can do both at a local level, but also to bring some learning from what we took from COP. And we're really pleased to have some of the people on the panel who are delegates at this year's COP, or last year's COP and COP29. So COP29's theme was In Solidarity for a Green World, and it set out this ambitious aim to address climate change challenges. So now we're thinking 90 days on, want to reflect and look forward to what this means in terms of the actions that we're taking locally. So whether that's locally in the place you are or in the region you're in. And this is this local perspectives. So this is an event that's been co-organised by the University of Plymouth in the UK, University College Cork in Ireland, and University of Massachusetts Lowell in USA. And again, we're looking at how we might take those collaborative approach and cross-regional approach to understand those local perspectives. So we're really pleased you can join us. We'll have approximately 10-minute sessions. Each speaker will speak for 10 minutes about an area of thinking post-COP that they've wanted to speak about, and then we'll have the opportunity for questions. Please do also, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat so we can see who's in the room, and also please do post questions during the talks. You don't have to wait until after the talks are finished, and we will then have an opportunity to post those questions back to the panel members. So it'd be great to have you actively participating. So thanks to our amazing panelists who've joined us. I'll just briefly introduce them and then I'll hand over to them to speak. So we've got Professor Deborah Greaves. She's from University of Plymouth in the UK, and she's director of the UK's Supergen Offshore Renewable Energy, or Hub. And she'll be speaking around some of those topics, and again was a University of Plymouth delegate and lead delegate at COP in 29. We have Samaya Mohammed. She's a climate activist, a law student, and a delegate at COP29, and is a law student at University College Cork. And we're really pleased to have her join us to present some of the youth perspective around COP as well. We've got Professor Juliette Rooney-Varga. She's director of the Climate Change Initiative at University of Massachusetts Lowell in the USA, and also many other roles we have here, including setting up the mock COP model for climate discussion. And finally, we've got Dr. Fionn Rogan. He's Senior Research Fellow at the Environmental Research Institute, the SFI Marai Centre at University College Cork in Ireland. So we're really delighted to have this range of speakers and looking forward to having that discussion. So again, please do join in the discussion after the speakers have spoken, and do post your comments, your questions in the chat while the speakers are speaking. If you'd like to, you don't have to wait until the final point. So I shall then take this opportunity to hand over to Deborah and look forward to hearing the discussion as we go forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Catherine. And thank you very much for the opportunity to run this post-COP event, because I think it's really important to share our sort of reflections on being involved in COP and try to find opportunities to get more involvement locally, and how we can sort of share that locally within our institutions. I think also this is a really very important and nice collaboration between the three universities. So it's very got some real positives. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my experiences of attending COP for the last few years. And that's mostly through the perspective of offshore renewable energy. As Catherine mentioned, I'm director for the Supergen Offshore Renewable Energy Hub. And when I first went to COP, it was in Glasgow in the COP26. And that was really to support the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, EPSRC stand, and to bring some of our research and policy work in offshore renewable energy. But at that time, we also applied for and were given observer status as a university. So that means we have the opportunity to attend the UN Conference of Parties on a regular basis. So we've actually attended and sent a delegation from the university from 26 through to this last year, COP29 in Baku. And through those activities, we have done various things. We've run discussion panels and we've run exhibits, and we typically do that in collaboration with other partners. And when you get involved in COP, if you have observer status, or you can go as a part of a delegation, then you can go into the blue zone. The blue zone is where the country delegates go and the negotiations go on. And then the green zone is also an area which is more open to the public. So there are opportunities to exhibit and have panel discussions in both of these areas. And I think the COP is a really exciting and particular environment where you can have some really interesting discussions on the science and the research that's going on being done together in an environment with policy discussions and policy activity, and obviously those negotiations going on. So it's a very particular environment to be part of, and a real privilege to be able to do that. So I think within the space of offshore renewable energy, what we've seen is a real increase in understanding of the importance of the ocean, both from the point of view of having pressures and risks posed by climate change affecting the ocean, the biodiversity, sea level rise and so on, and communities living close to the ocean, but also as a source of climate solutions. So in particular, things like offshore renewable energy, but also other sort of technologies are being developed around carbon dioxide removal and sequestration and so on. So there are various possibilities for climate solutions within the ocean. When I went this last year, then we were on a panel. I was on a panel to discuss the opportunities and for ocean climate and society and a multi-sector approach. And I was really bringing some thinking around the work that we've done in offshore renewable energy through the Supergent Offshore Renewable Energy Hub. And we've recently produced a report which is a sort of outlook on our 2040 ambition. So we have a lot of targets at the moment in the UK for 2030 in terms of the build out of offshore wind. And of course we have a global consensus generally for 2050 to get to net zero. But we wanted to see whether we're on track for that. So we've done some work to put together evidence around the timeframe of 2040, which seems to be soon enough to matter. So it's not that far away, but also it's not quite as soon as 2030. So it's far enough away for us to adapt for and to expect that the research that we're doing now can have a real impact. So we were looking at the status, particularly for the UK, the challenges and the status, and whether we are on track for getting to where we need to be by 2040 in order to deliver net zero by 2050. And we looked at this through various different frames. So I think there's quite a, as I say, strong consensus now around net zero, but there are also many different routes that we could take to get there. We need to make sure that we are following the best path for society globally. So we need to make sure that the research, innovation and policy action will address the development of renewable energy for supply in a holistic and equitable way. So really taking a whole system approach. So we look at some of the recent reports on future energy scenarios for the UK. Then we can extrapolate those and estimate 100 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2040. And that's going from a position now of about 14 to 15 gigawatts installed capacity. So how are we going to get to that hugely increased level? Well, we need to speed up the project development and the rate of build out of our projects by about 4 times in order to achieve where we need to get to by 2040. We also need to have by volume 7 times more than we have at the moment by 2040. So a huge challenge. part of the development time is taken up in planning and consenting. You may be aware there's lots of work going on at the moment and government announcements about planning process for onshore and offshore wind. But this is an area where there are ambitions to speed up the timeline. But of course, it needs to be done in a safe and secure and sustainable way. So we can perhaps, through the research that we're doing, we can help to speed up the planning and consenting processes through new types of sensors, new types of data collection, which can speed things up, shared use of the data for environment and for engineering purposes. We also looked at the number of people, the workforce and the skills in the sector generally, and the rate of increase and the size of the increase that's going to be needed by 2040. We need something like 3 times more people by 2030 and 6 times more people by 2040, according to some estimates in the UK. We need to have investments in and developments in our infrastructure and grid. So for floating offshore wind, it's particularly things like ports, manufacturing capability. We need to make sure the supply chain is ready. And as we move to greater volumes of offshore wind, then we need to move from fixed structures to floating structures. So that means new innovation as well. And all of this needs research, and it needs innovation and skills and workforce. So according to our report, we reckon we need to have something like 6 times more people by 2040. We need to be building out 4 times at the current rate, and we need to have a volume 7 times what we currently have. And against all of this, we also see the impact in the marine environment and the concerns around the biodiversity we have it within the marine environment, and also many, many competing users within the marine space. So we see that many of the opportunities there are in mitigation of climate change, as well as some of the impacts of climate change being felt. So within the UN process, we have, as well as the COP series, we also have the Convention on Biological Diversity, and that requires nations to set their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Within the COP series, then the UNFCCC requires countries to put their NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, forward. And it just so happens that within this year, both of these things are being done at the same time. So the deadline for the biodiversity strategy action plans is October 2024, and the nationally determined contributions for climate action are required by February 25. So there's a common time frame of these national commitments, and there's a real opportunity now to achieve some alignment and to see those biodiversity and nature-based solutions and nature-positive solutions for the ocean and marine environment being brought in and being implemented through the NDCs. So I think it's a really exciting time for the oceans, and for being for an opportunity to bring those policies together. Of course, and this is the real thing about COP that I mentioned right at the beginning. We need to develop those policies, but we need to do it with evidence, with good knowledge and research underpinning it. And that's the point I'd like to make. So thank you very much. I think that's my 10 minutes. I shall hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Deborah. That's really exciting to hear about offshore wind and the outcomes. So I'll hand over now to Sumaya, who's going to speak from her perspective. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So like Catherine introduced me earlier, my name is Sumaya, and I'm a first-year law student in UCC, University College Cork. So I guess I'll just talk a bit about my background first before I get into how I even was able to attend COP. So I got involved in climate kind of activism, advocacy, or environmentalism when I was 12 years old in my secondary school. So I was privileged enough to receive a climate education in my school, which was then called the Sustainability Short Course, which is now dubbed the Climate Action Short Course, during my first 3 years of secondary school. So through then I kind of learned about kind of the issues of the climate crisis and whatnot. But at that point, I really wasn't like taking it as seriously. I was a very outdoorsy person. I really liked the environment. I loved going on hikes and swimming, but I didn't really think too much about the climate crisis per se. But then one of my teachers said, anybody who's interested in kind of climate or environment related things, come to this room and we'll all just have a chat about it. So I went to one of the rooms, and there I kind of really learned about how dire the situation is right now and how important climate was. And this is in 2019, or it was December of 2018 actually. And then I got a wash of like eco-anxiety, which I didn't even really know what it was back then, but eco-anxiety is now like a whole thing where you feel just a dread about the future for the environment. And it is absurd to me that 12-year-olds and 8-year-olds and however young you are, people across the globe are feeling this, when the biggest worry that we should be having is, oh, am I gonna like my class or whatnot? So that's how I kind of got involved in climate. Through then, we decided to just take action, and I think one really key takeaway I got from that is that we had a teacher who empowered us, a teacher who really believed in what we were saying. And she didn't say, oh, just do some litter picking. She said, oh, go and organize something big. And so we did just that. It was like 12 to 14-year-olds in a room meeting every lunchtime on Wednesdays. And we decided to organize a protest. And we thought maybe 300 people would come, but then 5,000 people showed up. And it kept on going from there. And we got opportunities to speak at the Dole and like lobby politicians and the Late Late Show and whatnot. But then we co-founded the Students' Climate Action Network, which was a network of students and teachers campaigning for systemic justice from the government on climate. So I think that's something different that we did with SCAN, having teacher involvement, because I think we did recognize that groups that have no adult participation are excellent. Like those are amazing and kudos to them. But I think that at that point of our lives, and even now, we really recognize it's an intergenerational issue. Everybody needs to be part of the solution to solving the climate crisis, and also how much people more knowledgeable per se than us had to offer and in helping us organize things. So then I got to be one of the SCAN delegates, the Students' Climate Action Network delegate, to attend COP27. And our main kind of interest when I was attending there was obviously the loss and damage finance facility, but more so in regards to climate education, which is my main focus now. But I guess we'll talk about that in a second later in more depth. But attending COP27, which was in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, was quite a daunting experience. Like I was 16 years old and I was suddenly in a space filled with world leaders, scientists, policymakers, and I felt, and I was there for the full 2 weeks and on my own. Like I was with my mum, but she was kind of doing her own thing. But I felt very overwhelmed, and I was like, I want to go home. But I was suddenly in a place with like all these people, and I felt like what I had to say, I knew that it mattered, but it really, I felt very, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I was like, why am I here? Like, I feel like I'm not an expert in this, but I was 16 years old. I don't need to be an expert in anything. And I think only upon reflection can I actually recognize how so many young people feel that when they're attending these spaces, and the importance of youth participation in these spaces is extraordinarily, like, it's so important. But I felt like my voice was secondary until the last 2 days of COP, where it was just a bunch of us youth who were there like a day over time, and we were lobbying politicians left, right, and center, trying to get them to agree to this loss and damage finance facility. But it was a vital step for climate, like vulnerable nations who were suffering from extreme weather events. Like my whole family is from Somalia, and at that point, they were facing the worst drought than they had ever faced in like 12 years. And it was a really hard-fought victory that the loss and damage finance facility was agreed at COP27, but it wasn't something that was just agreed in 2 weeks. It was the results of the progress and the kind of effort put in by NGOs for years and years and years, and from all these global south countries, like fighting for their countries and for their people. And the world was already at like 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming, and yet fossil fuel emissions and whatnot, and these fossil fuel industries were not mentioned once at COP27. So this is kind of like the disconnect that we're up against at these kind of conferences. But anyway, so when I came back from COP, I was able to kind of share all the information. And at that point, I was part of the working group helping to form the climate action secondary school course for the Leaving Cert students, which is like A-levels in the UK. And so I was just collecting data for that, interviewing young people about do they feel like they have been a recipient of any sort of climate education in formal education settings? Do they feel like they deserve it? Do they feel like maybe they'd be more involved in climate or less anxious about the future and whatnot? So I was interviewing a lot of young people in regards to that. And I did that again at COP29, but in a kind of a different capacity. So I'm not involved with the Students' Climate Action Network anymore because now I'm in university, but I was the Associate General Secretary. I am the Associate General Secretary for Somalis for Sustainability. And I think at COP27, that's when I really got involved in kind of international spaces. So I got involved in Somalis for Sustainability, which is an international organization helping to spread climate education and climate awareness to diaspora all over the world and from Somali diaspora and also in Somalia. Because as we know that countries in Global South have been disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, and how a lot of them actually don't really know what's happening per se. They know that what's happening in their countries is just not normal and not ideal at all. But in a formal educational setting, are they being taught these things? And even that in Ireland. So I'm really like happy that I was involved in that kind of process. But so yeah, we look at kind of like UNESCO's analysis of 100 countries kind of revealed that only 53% of the national education curricula references climate change. And when it's mentioned, it holds low priority. And I think this is really important to see when we're so desensitized to things of people saying the climate crisis, when really we should be treating this like a crisis. So I went to COP29 this year with the UCC delegation and as part of the Somalis for Sustainability delegation. I felt a bit more comfortable this time because I was going with people that I knew. I knew people who were going there at this point, and I felt a lot more comfortable at the same time, though it was very daunting. I'm sure Fionn can attest to how like overwhelming the place was this year. But yeah, I think this year's COP was it was really overwhelming. I was there for 8 days, and I kind of went into it with a more, like I was saying, a climate education focused lens. We are trying to find partnerships for Somalis for Sustainability to be able to hold ELCOI in Somalia in this summer. So hopefully that will go ahead, which is like a mock COP that we're going to be doing coincidentally in Somalia for Somali youth, and partnerships with global universities in Somalia to help instill climate curriculums there. But I think one of my really key takeaways from this COP personally is that the power of youth voices is immense, and how youth movements have played such a crucial role in pushing for a stronger climate commitments. And I think there's this report, according to the UN, how over 70% of young people consider climate change a global emergency, and 60% of them feel anxious about their future due to this crisis. So if we're seeing this and we're seeing this push for these things, then people deserve to know what's happening. People deserve to know how their futures are going to be changing. But there's so many barriers to young people attending COP. I know that even myself attending COP, I was about to not be able to attend because of the funding issues. Like when you receive a badge and allocation to COP, that doesn't mean that you're automatically able to go. There's the issues of funding, there's the issues of accommodation, there's the issues of even being able to eat there. So I hope that wasn't a bit too all over the place, but three key things that I'd really like people to take away from what I was saying is that everybody is entitled to some form or whatever capacity of a climate education. And I think not underestimating youth voices and youth power, and not just viewing us as youth, viewing us as also people, experts in our own fields in some capacity. And yeah, I think that COP29 was a letdown in some capacities, but at the same time, I think that COP30 is going to be one of the most important COPs yet, and it'll be one of the COPs. It will be the first COP in 3 years that people are actually allowed to hold actions without having to fill out these extensive forms and get a bunch of permissions. So I think COP30 will be one to make sure that you're keeping up with. So I think that's a bit about what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samaya. That's fantastic to hear. And, you know, if only we could have more of more of you, bottle you and put you, I think would be amazing. I think you mentioned mock COP, but also the broader context. I will pass over to Juliet now and to speak from her perspective. Juliet.
Yeah, thanks. So it's really great to be here. It's really wonderful to be in a space that is, where a little bit outside of the American perspective at the moment. And great to hear from you, Samaya. I love what your energy, and I'm honored to, to share this panel with that energy and looking to, I am not one to say we're going to wait for the, younger generation to fix this, not at all. But working in partnership with young people, I think, is a beautiful way forward, and I'm excited to be part of that. I was not in Baku, but I was in Paris, so at COP in Paris, in Glasgow, and at Sharm el-Sheikh. And each one of those experiences was very different from each other. But I think what they share in common is that COP really represents this incredible opportunity for the world to come together, to learn, for us to learn from each other, and for us to push each other forward on climate action. I think sitting here in the US at the moment, that's something that we need more than ever. And we're also, sitting here in the US at the moment, we're also perhaps facing challenges to doing that may be greater than ever. So I think in a way, would love to just forget about what's going on here and focus on what's happening elsewhere and what's happened before at COP. But I don't think I can do that because I don't think I need to state the obvious that our new federal administration is not inclined to be part of this international conversation and push for action on climate change. And in fact, what we're seeing is really a full-on assault on the work that we're doing in the United States. So just to say, to be clear, we're not giving up. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. There are many of us who are pushing as hard as we can forward on climate action. We're staying the course, but we're facing some real new challenges. I don't think we know for sure what the full impact of this administration will be on climate action in the US and the world, for that matter, for years to come, right? It's going to take a long time for us to really kind of grapple with what's actually the impact's actually going to be. But that doesn't mean that we should take a wait and see attitude, or that we should close our eyes to what has already happened and what has already been said and what's already been done. And so just to state perhaps the obvious, the United States has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accord. That was, I think, a day one action that our new administration took. It's pushing hard on exactly what, in the opposite direction of climate action. It's encouraging vast areas of public land and federal waters to be open to oil drilling and mining, including fragile Alaskan wilderness, some of which I've been to as a scientist studying carbon cycling in the Arctic. It's halted federal approvals on new wind farms, both on land and offshore. And, for states like Massachusetts, that's perhaps a real challenge. We don't know what the full impact will be on our own climate goals yet, but offshore wind is certainly a major component, where those wind farms that are currently under construction are moving forward, but the ones that had approvals to go forward may not be, and certainly new leases will not be given under this administration. It's directed federal agencies to stop issuing permits for all wind farms anywhere in the country. And so that could actually influence projects that are on private lands if they need to have a federal wildlife or environmental permit. And it's also terminated or amended any leases that are already issued. It's putting the brakes on our federal EV subsidy and charging infrastructure programs. And it's also doing something which goes beyond that, which is seeking to revoke the rights of states that have moved forward with air quality standards or EV programs, subsidies, and policies that go beyond the federal ones. So, for example, it's trying to revoke California's and the like 17 or more other states, including Massachusetts, that have targets for 100% new car sales to be EVs within a decade or so. So there too, like, we're not sure what, even though we're a federation, we're not, you know, we're a federation of states, we're not sure what we're going to be able to do as states at the moment. So with all that bad news, I guess, I also just want to say, like, we don't know how much of this is going to succeed. We know that a lot of it is actually flying in the face of grants and loans from the government to companies, to universities, to researchers that are actually legally binding contracts. They don't have the right to revoke. So we're not sure what that means, and we're challenging, or, you know, there are active challenges to those actions for that reason. And also we're seeing actions that would actually dismantle or stop programs that were set up or authorized by Congress and would actually, according to our Constitution, take an act of Congress to change. So will those changes stand? They should not, but we don't know at this time. So I think that where I'm sitting right now, I think it's hard to, you know, it's not just climate change that we're worried about, because we know that climate change will not solve itself, right? It's not going to be solved by technology that's developed for the sake of profit. It's not going to be solved by the invisible hand of the free market. Technology, innovation, market forces are all critical to solving climate change. But they also need policy to be directed and driven in a way that benefits people and ensures that we have a thriving future on this planet. So for effective policy to address climate change, and for any number of other things, you know, we need effective government. And I think that ultimately this may sound, you know, completely obvious and basic, but we need, at the most basic level, right, we need to have trust in science, trust in our government, and fundamentally trust in each other. And I guess right now, I think, you know, the United States is a very complex place. It's a diverse place. It's good to remind ourselves that there's actually overwhelming support for climate action in the US. 67% of Americans support requiring fossil fuel companies to pay a carbon tax. 73% of Americans support regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant. And that includes a majority of moderate Republicans and almost half of conservative Republicans. We're also a federation of diverse states. We have 48 states and dozens of metropolitan areas that now have climate action plans, and 54% of our US population and almost 60% of our economy have net zero emission targets. And those are not going to go away regardless of who's in the White House. So I think now more than ever, we need to work with each other, and we need to work with our international partners to accelerate collaboration, accelerate learning, and accelerate action. I think even more fundamentally, as we look to how we can support a just transition to a green world, I know that I'm engaging in daily practice to remind myself of our core values, including the value of a thriving and sustainable future for people and the planet, for my kids. And I want those values to be our daily guide, regardless of what those in power seek to do. And as Samaya said, I was very heartened by that willingness to think big and to stand up and speak truth to power when those values are being questioned, or worse, attacked. So I'm grateful for this opportunity and, just extending an invitation to you all. We want to work with our international partners, more than ever. And we want to move climate action forward more than ever. And that's all I got. I'll hand it off.
Thank you, Juliet. Really sobering and great. I mean, really important to hear your voice on the perspective from the US. So we're going to hand over now to the final speaker, to Fionn from UCC Cork.
Thanks very much, Catherine, and thank you to all the previous speakers. Thanks to everyone for coming along today. So I'll talk a little bit about my experience of being at COP, so the on-the-ground experience, and then I'll reflect on 3 takeaways I have from this year's COP. So being at COP in Baku in Azerbaijan, this year there was about 60,000 attendees. And compared to my first COP back in Poland in 2013, that was about 10 times more people. It's a really, really big event. Why are there 10 times more people? Why are there 60,000 attendees at COPs now? I mean, the number of countries in the world hasn't grown in the last 10 years, but there are much more observers, NGOs like myself and kind of other colleagues on the call today, from universities, from environmental organizations, from many countries, from many organizations, but also lots of lobbyists. Fossil fuel lobbyists were a big presence at this year's COPs, as has been reported in the media, as well as renewable energy companies attending COP. So it's a really massive event that really takes a few days to kind of get your head around what's happening. And in many ways, there's 2 COPs. There's the negotiations on the one hand with kind of governments and policymakers and advocates like Samaya, keeping an eye on them to make sure that they're kind of being honest and following through. But there's also the blue zone and the green zone. But Deborah mentioned some of this. So this is really the business of climate change, and this is kind of knowledge sharing, building coalitions. There's some greenwashing going on as well, but there's a huge amount of activity in the area. And that reflects the kind of the big business of renewable energy, which is, I think, one of the positive things I've seen in the last 10 years. Now, at COP29, I was there in early November. Mr. Trump had just been elected. I was expecting Trump quake, but there was barely a sign of it at all. The COP really flowed on. There was a really business as an awful lot of people being very busy. So being at a COP is a bit like being in a really busy airport for kind of living there for a whole week. There's just people flowing in all directions at all times. To try and track the negotiations, you might meet somebody there who's involved on the front line and you can get an insight to the actual negotiations, but still following what's happening on social media is an important part of kind of following the negotiations. But being there does give you a visceral sense that climate change is a global issue. There's so many people who are impacted and in different ways. And I come from Ireland, live in the south of Ireland in Cork, where we've seen some climate impacts already. But there are others around the world who are much more on the front line in terms of the negative impacts of climate change and have a much diminished capacity to fight that. So you get to see that and meet those people that are kind of impacted by that. But you also get to see the power dynamics that are playing out, how some countries are kind of have disproportionate power. I've seen previous ministers for the environment from Ireland kind of go to COP, not really having very strong feelings about climate change, but coming away passionately committed to climate change after just being at a COP and meeting other people that are there. So just meeting people can really, I think, bring a different perspective. So I have 3 reflections on this year's COP. First is about the hosts. Azerbaijan were the host of this year's COP. They really got it through a process of elimination. They were the last one standing. Previous COP that I was at was Paris COP and COP21. So I was comparing France as hosts 10 years ago for the Paris Agreement and Azerbaijan now. And they were very, very different. In my experience, France was a very prepared host for COP. They worked all year round, having meetings in embassies in so many countries around the world. They were really ambitious. They really wanted to get an agreement. And they got the Paris Agreement successful. It was fabulous. COP29, Baku, they were much more accidental hosts. They really didn't have the same ambition. they were operating in bad faith a lot of the time. They were more beholden to particular interests, particular countries. And a less prepared host country is much easier to disrupt, and progress is much easier to obstruct. So I think that reflects some of the disappointed outcomes that came out from COP29, was just the hosts really weren't up to it. Looking forward, COP30 in Brazil, I'm somewhat optimistic, I must say, because they are a much more genuine country. There's a kind of more progressive government in power at the moment. Biodiversity and indigenous peoples have a much more real impact, reality in Brazil, and they are already preparing. And I saw that at COP29. They were hosting events, hosting discussions. They've got a lot of kind of civil servants who are going out to Bilim, and they're one of the only 13 countries that have already submitted an NDC, and all the NDCs will be reviewed at COP30. There is a climate leadership vacuum at the moment, and kind of others have alluded to that. So I think other countries like Brazil are going to try and claim that space. My second reflection from COP29 is on the kind of the systems perspective. And one of the narratives coming out of COP29 was, COP finance. We got a deal on finance. It was a bit underwhelming for some, but there has been a growth in finance, and that reflects the growth in renewables. And that narrative is often emphasized, the growth in renewable electricity capacity, which is great, but greenhouse gas emissions globally are also rising. So we've got record renewable energy, but also record greenhouse gas emissions rising. So those two things need to be reconciled, and that's the importance of systems thinking to bear those two things in mind. Energy demand is still growing. Fossil fuels demand is still growing in many countries. I was at the Global Carbon Project event when they kind of presented some of this data, and the mood was pretty down to look at, to see this growth despite the growth in renewables, we had this growth in emissions. The mock COP has been mentioned by some of the speakers. So tools that Juliet and others have helped develop, En-ROADS and C-ROADS. These are great kind of simple online modeling tools that can simulate the global climate and the energy system and help people, anybody, organizations to understand these dynamics that are happening in the climate system, but how we can find solutions that can help us to realize the Paris Agreement goals. So I'd really recommend anybody on the call to check out En-ROADS and C-ROADS to understand these things a bit better. The last point I want to talk about is innovation, and we've heard a good bit of innovation mentioned so far, and there's a real need for it. And I'm particularly interested in energy innovation. I got some insights into innovation from a particular event that I attended. It was a climate entrepreneurship event, and it was hosted by the US Department of State. And we probably won't see a similar kind of event organized in the next few years. But it was a fascinating event. It was a real glimpse, good and bad, into the kind of climate future for me. And because there were two presentations from two climate startups, and they were both using AI. And AI, as we know, is driving increased energy demand, which is contributing to that global increase in energy. But one of these climate startups was using AI to improve the accounting for forestry and soil health that will contribute to future carbon markets. So they're helping to kind of quantify and monetize different parts of the natural world, kind of bringing it into the kind of capitalist system, but also helping to quantify emissions sequestration. So that trend of kind of quantifying nature, I think that's going to grow for better or for worse. The other climate startup, they talked about temperature data, using AI to kind of improve microscale temperature data for cities. What would this be used for? So it was to develop an app, a navigation app. And one of the founders said, instead of Google Maps telling you the shortest route to your destination, it'll tell you the coolest route based on which parts of the city are safest to walk because of potential heating effects. So they're using AI to improve their weather forecast to kind of help people navigate in a warmer world. Now, will that actually work if everybody has that app on their phone, or will only certain people be able to afford to have that app on your phone? Either way, it's not it's a vision of what a warmer world can look like and how some people might be able to adapt, but not everybody. So we really need the climate justice to really kind of bring that perspective. And that's why it's so important for people like Samaya to be at COPs and kind of holding some of these countries to account. So that was a vision for me of what a kind of climate disrupted world can look like. And I got to see that from being at COP. So it's so important to see what that's like. So those are all my perspectives. Thanks very much to others, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Fionn. I feel like we've covered such a broad spectrum of different perspectives and different insights, and all really valuable. So thank you to our speakers. It's been fascinating. We've got a short time for questions now. There's been a range of questions in the chat. I was going to ask, first of all, if any of the panel would like to ask a question to anyone else in the panel before we get started. No obligation, but just in case you've got a burning thought you'd like to bring across. No, but I'll pick up then on, it's actually a question, the first one I'm going to pick up it's actually a question addressed to Samaya, but I think it sort of would be something that perhaps all the panel might want to respond to. The question said the conversation from Samaya was transformative, so I think we all found that. I really appreciated hearing from you, Samaya, and you brought great to hear about the youth perspective. But so perhaps we could address this to all the panel. So with all the work that's been done in regards to climate action, what has had the most traction and leverage in creating meaningful change? So maybe we'll start with Samaya, and then maybe, if you wouldn't mind, we can go around to the other panel members. So Deborah, Juliet, and Fionn to briefly answer. We can have a short answer, if you can.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that's something that, like, in every single organization I've ever been in, that's what we really do reflect on after every event. Like, has this actually created meaningful change, or will this lead to meaningful change? And I think personally, I have 3 things that like really stick out to me in all my work. Is number 1, how many people that like SCAN and Fridays for Future and like Somali's for Sustainability and whatnot have inspired, and not only just inspired, but empowered to create meaningful change in their own communities and globally. I think that even like in SCAN, we would teach primary school students, secondary school students, college students, staff about how to foster climate activism in the classroom, how to foster in their own homes and whatnot. And I think that it's mobilized thousands of people intergenerationally to engage in direct climate action in whatever capacity. And I think that initiative has really proven that when people unite, that systemic change is 100% possible. The next one I'll try to keep this short, is that I'm really proud of this, is establishing a climate action leaving cert course. I don't think I would have gotten involved in climate as much as I have if I didn't have that junior cycle course, and having incredible teachers in our school who were directly involved with this leaving cert course as well was just incredible. And I think it's going to really create like a generation of really well-informed climate leaders in whatever capacity that they choose, and not just like people who are advocating verbally, but also people who are directly involved with policy things and legislation changes and whatnot. And then last one, I think in 2019, when we were all getting involved with the climate movement at the beginning, I think that the kind of uproar of young people advocating for climate really did influence the official declaration of climate emergency by Eamon Ryan, which pressures policymakers to act. And has it actually been proven? I don't know, but I think that's something I was really proud of, and it was like a really big win. So yeah, they're my 3.
Deborah?
Well, I suppose in terms of things that we've done to have meaningful change or impact, I think one area is trying to bring the conversation into different disciplines and to work together collaboratively. So, quite often the different, and one obvious example is the technology developments for climate action or for climate change mitigation around offshore renewables, and the biodiversity impacts and the planning activities and so on around that. And they obviously can, in some cases, be in conflict, because maybe some of the technologies that are developed, if they're developed too quickly, then they may have negative impacts on biodiversity. So really trying to bring people together so that we can try to, I suppose, speed up the learning time by working together and speaking one another's languages is a really important thing. So yeah, trying to bring people together, working across disciplines, trying to take that system approach, and think about the different systems that will be impacted. And then I think the other thing is, yes, it's about science and evidence informing policy and trying to bring the science into the policy space and create those conversations. But also, hearing other voices. So there are other knowledge systems that need to be brought in as well, and being part of that conversation.
Juliet.
Yeah, I mean, if you just echoing or reframing, I guess, a few things that have already been said, I think one thing that we've learned is that when people have a shared goal to which they are deeply committed, I don't want to say anything is possible, but almost anything is possible. And so I think that's one thing that we found at the Climate Change Initiative at UMass Lowell, is that we're really able to bring people together across many different disciplines and interests because of that deep shared commitment to accelerating climate action. I think that the other kind of side of that is, how do you develop a shared goal when you have interests that are diverse and potentially even, sometimes divergent, right? Like that sometimes are not well aligned. And I think they're, or that you don't even know about each other's interests and cares. Like when we're thinking about climate action at the community level, or academics getting out of academia and really into community level, like ultimately translating science into action means that we can't just be talking to each other. Like we need to get out and engage just people. And so I think our work with really having an open and honest invitation to community members and community leaders, and to listen to them, and then to find shared goals, or to find what we call, ways to do multi-solving, we call it, where we can take one action that we're all committed to that addresses multiple problems at the same time, whether that's, access to food and clean water, or economic opportunity, or connection to nature and each other, or education, or, climate action. So if we can find one thing that does all of those things, you're going to be able to bring a lot of people on board and have much more of an impact. And I'll pass it on to Fionn.
Yeah, thanks, Juliet. Yeah, great question. Two things from me. So I work in kind of energy engineering and modeling, and looking at different solutions to meeting climate goals for Ireland. I've worked in this area for about 10 years, and when I started out, my main output was academic papers. And now with my colleagues, Brian Gallagher's on the call, and others, we try and condense our findings into an infographic, a one-pager, or maybe just 5 points, to really simplify our insights, make our evidence as kind of to the point as possible. And the more we've done that, the farther our analysis has reached. Just if it's a really short document, it can be passed on to somebody and it can get into a decision maker's hand. And at a previous COP, we happened to see from Twitter, as it was at the time, a minister for environment and energy for Ireland. He was reading one of our reports at a plenary session in COP, and we could just see from the picture that the ambassador took of him that he was kind of looking at our report. So we had spent a lot of time kind of making sure that report was as digestible as possible. So for anybody working in that kind of knowledge business, or working in university, so really getting to the point and thinking about your communication and how to kind of tell stories and spread your insights. And the second point I'll make about kind of impact is the mock COP. And so we've run a number of simulation of climate negotiations in UCC, and in the classroom and in the university. And those have been very impactful events for the people participating. They really get a sense for how difficult climate action is. And as organizers, we have to be careful that we don't we give people a sense of hope at the end of the event, that they don't go home, you know, more depressed than they came in. But it really gives them a sense for what's at stake, that it's not just someone else's problem. It's not just some technology is going to fix it. You know, there are real issues of power and justice and fairness and history kind of tied in with this, and everything is at stake. And in UCC, we've also asked previous delegates who have gone to the actual COP what they've learned. And I've been looking at the perspectives of people who've done the mock COP and people who've actually gone to COP, and they're actually very similar. Now, not everybody can go to the real COP. That's not sustainable, but a lot more people can do the mock COP than go to the real COP. So I've seen kind of people learn from doing the mock COP, so that kind of lived learning experience. So I think more of that can really help to give to really communicate a sense for what's at stake and what some of the solutions can be.
Brilliant, thank you, Fionn. Now, I've done a rather poor job of managing the questions because we haven't managed to cover all the questions that have come in from the chat, but I'm hoping that the sort of spirit of some of the questions has been answered in those panel responses then. So thank you to all the people who posted questions, and I hope you feel that we've responded to them in some way in the questions. And interesting point about the mock COP. I know we've had a discussion about perhaps organising some mock COPs both in Plymouth and in Cork again in the future. So obviously following on from what Cork's done in the past. So perhaps if you're interested, you can get back in touch with the Sustainable Earth Institute in Plymouth or with partners in Cork and UniMass. So I'm going to draw to a close now. Thank you so much to our speakers and to our the people who've attended online. We can't see you, but we've really appreciated. I hope you've enjoyed hearing our speakers and having those local perspectives from COP. 90 days on, I feel like we have both some things to look forward to and some things to caution us and to make us reflect. But I think what came across is the need for interdisciplinarity, cross-collaboration, and making action sort of tangible or understandable to those who. So there's some themes that came through from what we're talking about. So thank you again to our panellists and to the organisers of the event, Sustainable Earth Institute and University College Cork, University of Plymouth in the UK and University of Massachusetts Lowell. Thank you for at least our little bit of collaboration to bring this event together. So I think we'll draw to a close and yes, wish everyone a nice rest and afternoon. Thank you very much.